all of us, whether we have children or not, are ancestors. We are all building the world that is to come. The people who are alive in the future will all look at us as the people who built whatever they're dealing with. So, this is for all of us.
This episode of Your Brain on Climate is all about time, long time from different perspectives, from other people's perspectives, from other species' perspectives, and from the planet's perspective. Now look, we think in human time. That's because we are human and we have human brains and we live the life that we live. But life runs on different timescales for different things. Now, imagine you're a pigeon. From the point of view of a pigeon, life is short. From the point of view of the climate, well, it's long. It's longer than we can imagine. It's, in many ways, millions, billions of years long. But also, in terms of the changes we're wreaking on it, shorter than we can really sometimes get our human brains around. And so much of human time, my time for sure, is spent thinking about the scrabbly here and now, the desperately short term, particularly in our desperately short term society these days. But the decisions we need to take when it comes to climate change are about different types of time, the long term, and what it means to be around as a species at all. Joining me this time round is Ella Saltmarshe. Ella is the director of the Long Time Project and co-founder of the brilliant Internarratives Project, which I have plenty to do with in my day job. She's a brilliant thinker, a brilliant speaker, and has her own podcast, The Long Time Academy, which helps people think themselves into different spaces and times with a view to being better ancestors and better humans in the here and now. We talk about how Ella came to think about the importance of long time and how she's pivoted her whole work to be around that, why it is that humans are so biased to think of the short term, sometimes, how entrenched that is, the damage and the danger of doing that, what we can learn from other cultures here in the West about different perceptions of time, and how we can change how our brains think about the long term, both in our personal lives but as part of a wider societal shift that we desperately need. As always, if you hear this noise, it denotes wisdom. That wisdom will come from Ella, rarely comes from me. It means you don't have to pause the podcast. You can go and look at the show notes and then afterwards find out all the information that has been referred to. And please, if you love this show, please do consider chucking in a couple of quid at www.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Thank you to everyone who does. It really makes a big difference. Not enough people do it. I'd love more people to do it. I pay my guests. It helps me get brilliant people and respect their time. And if you can't do that, please go to your podcast medium of choice and give me a review. That would be amazing too. So look, let's get on with it. And I start by asking Ella about how she came to think about time and long time in particular in the first place.
Your brain on climate.
There were a few different pathways into this for me. The first was something very experiential. So I've been working in climate for a long time at that point, probably 12 years, 13 years. And there was an incident that happened one day when I was looking after my then toddler nephew. And now he is massive and obsessed with Minecraft and Warhammer and things. But back then he was 2 and he was obsessed by doors, like any kind of doors, cupboard doors, shower doors, car doors.
It's a shame we don't restrain our attention to doors, isn't it? It's a lot simpler if you just care about doors.
It really would be. Well, I mean, Finn really, did it for us. And so I was looking after him one afternoon and he was playing with a massive cupboard door, which I, because of the door obsession, didn't think anything of. And I was doing some work and reading one of the articles that we would have all read with terrifying predictions for the end of the century. And then I heard a noise, I looked up and I saw he was about to use his kind of tiny heft to pull this massive cupboard down on him. So I kind of threw the article down, ran over to him, pushed the cupboard up, picked him up. He started screaming at the injustice of being taken away from the most awesome game in the universe. And to both of our utter surprise, I started crying too, because suddenly in that moment, I realized that he'd likely be around in the future I'd just been reading about, and that I was not going to be there to scoop him up from danger. And suddenly, despite the fact that I had been working on climate for so long, everything changed. And I know now that what I was experiencing was this profound moment of intergenerational empathy. And it really changed everything for me. And so I began to think, well, if it's been such a profound experience for me, could it be a profound experience for others? So that was the experiential route in. And then I guess there was a more strategic route in as well, in that I'd been working on climate comms for a long time at that point. And this was kind of pre-XR, pre the idea of a climate emergency being widely accepted. And those of us who've been working on it a long time, it was like banging your head against a wall, and it was nothing seemed to be working. And I started to have a hunch that perhaps there was something in time, and that perhaps getting us to think differently about the future could help us take more responsibility for it. And so instead of talking just about climate as an issue, thinking more about these existential questions we all have about our lives, right? Most of us have questions about what's the point of my life? What is going to happen to the people I love when I'm not around anymore? What will my legacy be? What will be left when I'm not here anymore? And so could these kind of questions be a more fruitful route in to climate action?
Right, there's a lot in there, so this is good. We've got time to pick this apart a bit. And when you say you've got a thing called the Long Time Project,
Yes.
what is long time to you? How are you defining that?
Well, long time can be any length of time, if I'm honest, because what we're interested in is this idea of being a good ancestor. And different temporalities help us be good ancestors in different ways. So engaging with deep time, with the kind of 4.6 billion year history of our planet can support us to be good ancestors.
That makes my head hurt when you do that.
I know. Well, it used to make my head hurt too. Like, I am not a natural geologist, I've got to say. And I remember my dad is really into rocks, and he used to kind of drag us out and explain to us all the eras and eons, and I'd always get them muddled up, and I'd be like, can we just go home and watch Neighbours? And he'd be like, no. And then so until I started doing this work, I really couldn't engage with it, and now that has completely changed, and I find deep time to be some of the most meaningful work. So some of the work around deep time, for example, can help us really feel how improbable life on Earth is, like how extraordinarily, like how by all odds we shouldn't be here. Complex life should not exist, and yet it does. And so it can help us develop a sense of reverence for what we have, and then perhaps also a sense of rage that so many billions of years of improbable luck is being destroyed so quickly by so few. So deep time can do one set of things that can support us being a good ancestor. And then if we think about human time frames, which we can think of as about 7 generations, our kind of grandparents, great-grandparents, through to those of our great-grandchildren, then that can help foster that kind of intergenerational empathy that I talked about. We can think about civilizational time. That can be really helpful in helping us understand how we developed the short-term systems that we live in, help us see those systems as things that were created by humans and so can be remade. And then we have kind of cosmic time, ancestral time. You can then start to kind of do ladybird time, pigeon time, stinging nettle time. I mean, there's so many different kinds of time. And I guess our work at the Long Time Project really is about understanding the way that different temporalities can support our ability to be good stewards.
And all of which sounds a bit like, by the way, you are telling me what pigeon time is in a minute, but all of which sounds a little bit like getting out of our own kind of impulse to just think about us now, right here and now, and doing stuff to our brain that I guess makes us slow down, think about others, take more responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What's pigeon time?
Well, I mean, in honesty, who knows what pigeon time is? But some of the work is
Pigeons,
about helping us start to try and empathize with how other species might experience time. So there are practices that you can do to do that. I doubt you'll actually be experiencing time as a pigeon, but the process of doing it will both help you empathize with other species, it will help you decenter your human experience, and it will also help you develop your ability to be polytemporal. So that means your ability to use lots of different temporalities. So yeah.
Oh, come on, tell me more about it. So this sounds like a really nice, I like to give tips. We're going to be pigeons for a bit. If we were going to try to experience life as a pigeon, how would you help people do that?
Well, I mean, I'd firstly advise you to go and hang with some pigeons. So
Right.
go and find some
Good.
pigeons, step one.
It's actually not impossible. You might be able to hear. The reason I'm so interested in pigeons is there's loads of the blighters just out there. So that's good. I can sort of see some pigeons.
There you go. You've got them there. So you can go and you don't even have to go. It sounds like you've got them outside your window. And then have a conversation with them. So you might want to have this conversation in your head. You might want to speak it out loud. People might think you're absolutely nuts if you do, but, don't worry. And then generally when I do any work with another species, I just firstly ask them, is it okay? I'd like to have a conversation with you. Is that okay? And I sense a response. And all of this is not about using our intellectual brain. So it's about where might you feel a response to that question? And then you might ask them to describe their experience of being alive to you and hear what comes back. And then you might ask them, how does time feel for them? And again, sensing what comes back. It might be a feeling, it might be a physical sensation, or it might be a thought. Then asking them if they've got any advice for you around how to do time. And then kind of saying goodbye. I mean, that's a short version. You can have longer conversations. So it's not a conversation that is based in science. There are lots of experiences that are more scientifically based that you can do to experience the world as other species do them. And there are people doing incredible work in this space. But this is more about cultivating our capacity for interspecies empathy.
Empathy is what's coming out. So you're not suggesting I actually talk to the pigeons, or if I do talk to the pigeons, it's not in any great expectation that the pigeons will speak back. It is more about encouraging me to think more pigeon.
Maybe, but they might speak back.
What I'd quite like to do is to communicate with my cat, and I'd have some things to communicate with the cat that are not about its perception of time. It would be rather more pointed about letting me have a good night's sleep for the moment. So let's talk a bit about life in the short term. So the society, the world, the psychology that we have. What do you think the kind of, psychologically speaking, you must have thought about, why are we so biased to the here and now? What's going on?
Yeah, so obviously we've got these neural systems in our brain that incentivizes short-term pleasure and rewards. So, we get our dopamine fixes from all kinds of things. And there is an idea that this has Neanderthal roots, and it comes from a time when we found food, we had to eat it. And so we needed to eat as much food as we could whilst it was there. So there's this idea that we were living in scarcity, and so we needed to be focused on the short term. And of course, those traits today, when many of us are not living in scarcity, are not serving us in the kind of context that we're in. And so we have this tendency towards the present, something called present bias. And we see that play out in lots of different ways. So, with present bias, we see that we will accept less today over more tomorrow. So we're not good at deferring rewards. And we see it play out in some of the ways that we talk about time, we talk about the future. So we tend to use words like far and distance, which makes it feel like it's a horizon, a foreign land, when it won't be. The future will be here. It will be where we are, as well as many other places. So we have these traits in our brains, which can make us very short term. I'm going to stay on the theme of short-termism as per your question, but I then will want to come back and talk about some other ways that our brain works that helps us be long-term. But let's stick with the short-term for now. So we have these brains that work in this way, but then we also have a whole load of systems that we live in that prioritize short-termism. So whether that is quarterly reporting in business, whether that is our election cycles, whether that is the 24-hour news cycle, whether that is the fact that fast fashion now has 52 seasons a year. Like we are in this kind of this whirl of the present, stuck in the short term. And so we find ourselves in this situation where, as a species, we now face more existential risk than we ever have. So, an existential risk is a risk to us as a species at a species level. So things like climate change, biodiversity loss, unchecked AI, pandemics, biological warfare, and on and on and on. Like, we have done a bang-up job at adding lots of strings to that bow. And the reason that has happened is cultural. So if we understand the deep narratives we hold, the worldviews we have, the values that get played out as being foundational to everything else in the world, so they are the soil from which our economics, our law, our politics, our technology, our science, everything grows from that cultural soil. So if we find ourselves in this extreme existential peril, that is cultural. And if we want to get out of it, then we will need to work with culture. So culture got us into this mess, and it is culture that is going to help get us out of it. And so for us, our work is really focused on, well, how can we support a paradigm shift so that stewardship lies at the heart of our culture? So we're not only interested in the long term because everything being short term is making things a bit rubbish, but also because we see this as a really foundational value that could help us reorientate ourselves and support the cultural shift that we are going to need for the rapid social, economic, political transformations of the next decades.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, but it strikes me, I think it feels like a particularly, in the UK anyway, where we are, it feels like a particularly short-term sort of malaise has settled over things in the last kind of 10 years. And I don't know if that's just me getting older and being miserable, but we haven't been building stuff and we haven't been kind of investing in the future. And there's been more and more kind of get rich quick, like the prevalence of gambling everywhere and things like the X Factor when you don't have to work at stuff and you just kind of achieve things. It feels like now our culture, our society is more short-term oriented than it's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're in this kind of terrible paradox, really, that this moment requires us to step up and be good ancestors. When we look at, I don't know, there's an image, a brilliant kind of representation of the past, present and future of humanity, where there's 3 circles. So there's a little circle that represents all of us alive on the planet right now, so all, 8.1 billion of us. And then another circle that represents all the humans that have lived over the past 50,000 years, which I think is about, I should check that out, 100? Let me find the stats. 100 billion, yeah, that's 100 billion. So 100 billion dead over the past 50,000 years, 8.1 billion alive now. And then if we look at the lives that could be born in the next 50,000 years, it's 6.75 trillion lives. And that's just human lives. Like, imagine how enormous that circle would be if it was all the lives that we are influencing on this planet. And so, those of us alive right now hold this disproportionate amount of intergenerational responsibility. It's kind of going to be on us, the quality of those lives and ultimately whether they will exist at all. And so, we're at this moment where, like, we so desperately need to be able to engage with the long term. And yet we're stuck, we're stuck on our phones, we're stuck listening to true crime podcasts, disassociating, being overwhelmed by, the situation we find ourselves in. And so, our work is really about helping people move beyond that, helping people develop the cultures, the practices, the institutional change that will support us to be who our species needs us to be in this moment. So, yes, there are elements of our brain that are very short term, but then there are also aspects of our brains that lend themselves to our ability to be long term. So the psychologist Martin Seligman calls us Homo Prospectus, because we have this ability to imagine alternative futures. Another psychologist, Thomas Sudenhof, talks about how we create theatre sets in our minds, that we can kind of treat the future as if it was the present, that this ability that we have to literally build worlds of the future in our minds today that feel real to us, gives us this huge evolutionary advantage that we have acted on in many ways. We have had these epic projects that have spanned generations, cathedrals that took 400 or 500 years to build. We plant oak trees and let them grow for hundreds of years. There are many ways, from our pensions to those of us who have them, to other forms of life planning that are very unique to our species. And so the kind of big question is, how can we cultivate the conditions where these aspects of our brains can trump the Neanderthal dopamine-fueled bits of them?
There's something else you can do when you've finished listening to this episode of Your Brain on Climate. You can go and listen to another episode, my chat with Adam Bully, who's about foresight, and he wrote a book with the aforementioned Thomas Sudenhof all about this stuff and about how we tell amazing stories of the future. And isn't that a brilliant thing about our brains? What can we learn? Because I'm very aware this is a very sort of, if not a Western focus, certainly a kind of, you and I, people from the UK focus thing. What can we learn from other cultures, either past or present, or how things have been done differently, thought about differently?
I mean, there's huge amounts to learn from other cultures. I guess the first thing to learn from other cultures is just that time is cultural, like that time is a story. And it doesn't feel like it, right? Because time is like just this eternal thing that is how the world is and how we experience our lives. So we can't see it. It's the water we swim in. But actually it's a story. And other cultures have very different stories around time. So, for example, Maori people in New Zealand, there's a phrase, I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. So they see themselves as walking backwards into the future, facing the past, because you can see the past, but you can't see the future. Many Native American cultures will experience time as being cyclical and rhythmic rather than linear. So, for example, the Hopi language doesn't have past and future tenses. So there's just, the first thing we can learn is time is cultural, which is a big thing because it can help free us up from how we're experiencing it. It can help us start to be more aware, more critical of how we're doing time, to understand the origins of the stories we have around time. So that's one thing we can learn from looking at other cultures. Then obviously there is lots to be learned from Indigenous cultures when it comes to these ideas of stewardship and taking care of future generations. like mindsets, practices, institutions founded in stewardship are at the heart of most Indigenous cultures. And so if we want to flourish far into the future, we would do well to learn from cultures with far greater longevity than our own. So, there's so many different examples. I mean, the one that I often quote is I'm going to try and bring it up now so that I don't misquote it. It is from the great law of the Iroquois Confederacy, and there is this beautiful quote from that where it says, "Look and listen for the welfare of the whole people, and have always in view not only the past and present, but also the coming generations, even those whose faces are yet beneath the surface of the ground, the unborn of the future nation."
Your brain on climate.
Why would we think like this on a day-to-day kind of level? So I can see that it helps us think about the future in a sense of what big life choices to make, those kind of things. But does it help us to think long-term, more long-term, on a kind of very practical day-to-day kind of sense, when you've got the kids to wash and you've got, things to buy and decisions to make? Is this something, I guess I'm asking, that is a luxury for when we don't have all this other stuff going on? Or can it actually be, thinking about the long term, be a practice that shapes much more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many of us at the moment have these twin tracks in our lives. Like we have the track of everyday life, the kind of doing the laundry, doing the washing up, sorting out childcare, buying the shopping, making sure the household accounts are all right, like doing more laundry, just the stuff of our lives. And then we have this other track going on, this track of runaway climate change, of children being killed in Gaza, of vast swathes of the Amazon being destroyed, of AI-powered killer robots possibly appearing on the scene. And that we have this second track, which will appear every now and then. It will kind of appear with terrifying kind of, with a deafening shriek. It might come, it might wake us up at night, it might make us feel more anxious. And I think more and more of us are experiencing that. And unless we find ways of dealing with that second track, it will seep into our daily lives more and more. It will haunt us. So I see that this work can kind of give us a sense of existential relief, but it's not because it just makes us feel better. It's because it gives us ways to be actively addressing the things in that second track, which can change the way our daily lives feel. And I think, the other two tracks that are going on at the moment is, on the one hand, we're all kind of doing our daily lives as normal in the systems that we're in, and we at the same time know that things are going to need to change really quickly, quite soon. And so what's that going to mean, and how are we going to translate those two things? And so again, I think this kind of work can help us start to live some of those questions. And so I definitely am not promising it's going to be like a kind of pill you can take that's going to make all your worries go away, because it won't, but it will make them feel different.
Well, that thing about anxiety and worries is so spot on, isn't it? I was reading a good piece in the Times a few weeks ago, as you listen to this now, about an experiment to try and get kids to leave smartphones alone, and how hard some kids find that to do, because so much of it is in a thing is happening, and if you don't immediately understand the latest thing, you will be left out of conversations. And the links between social media use and childhood anxiety are, Jonathan Haidt's done a load of work on this. There's a load of stuff out there. So maybe there's something about like that, cultivating in our school kids, cultivating in our education system, that maybe the here and now is not always the most important lens to view stuff through. Or is that airy-fairy?
I mean, I don't think it's airy-fairy, given that that movement, the kind of the kids and smartphone movements, is gaining huge momentum, and and the stats on anxiety and all the mental health issues that are stemming from extensive smartphone use, I think we will be changing our habits en masse pretty quickly. So I don't think it's airy-fairy.
Between 2.5 billion and 500 million years ago, oxygen levels rose dramatically. Much of the life that had managed to take hold by then was anaerobic or lived without oxygen. But thanks to the evolution and hard work of cajillions of photosynthetic algae called cyanobacteria, which started pumping out oxygen like nobody's business, the composition of the atmosphere changed to the point where a whole lot of anaerobic life.
So what is
deal.
Climate time? Like, what happens? We've done pigeons, but what happens if we think climatically? Firstly, who are we having a conversation with, do you think? But what do we learn about time from the climate's perspective?
Oh, that's such a great question. There's, again, thinking climatically can involve different kinds of time. Because on the one hand, we can get back into the realm of deep time and of looking at climate patterns over time, which can be quite hard to do. Unless you have a particular kind of brain that is awesome at abstraction, that can feel quite remote. And so then there is the lived time, and I guess that is how we are experiencing the climate, but how we can also develop empathy with how others are experiencing the climate. This summer they had the extreme heat wave in Delhi. When the temperature was hitting 52 degrees, and I read a Twitter thread by an Indian journalist describing her day, and so it was about time. She was like, "This is what it's like at night. This is what it's like when I wake up in the morning," and it was so moving. The way she talked about how at 7 a.m. every surface in her house was already boiling. She couldn't touch anything. How the water in the taps is already boiling at that point, and there was something in her describing her day that brought her experience of climate right into my body, really helped me empathize with it. So I think that there's thinking about how we can develop that kind of empathy, which loads of people are thinking about. And then I guess there's how we deal with all of the predictions that are coming. Climate, up until the last 15, 20 years, when we really started to see the impacts of climate change play out in the present, climate was always a challenging issue because it involved us being able to think into the future. It involved our Neanderthal brains, which are kind of prioritized to see threats that look like a woolly mammoth, not like a kind of gas we can't smell or see, having impacts in a world we might not be in. Our brains just kind of don't know what to do with that. And so that's why the role of arts and culture particularly are really important when we start getting into the realms of futures, because they can help us start to feel what this might mean. And I think, science and facts are incredibly important in this space. In an era of climate denialism or delayism, it's so important that we have facts and science. And it's so important that we work on the level of emotions and feelings, because those are what move us. The word emotion comes from the Latin movere, to move. If we want people to move, that is the level we have to be working on.
I think there's something about intergenerational time that I was reflecting on. I think it's when you said that Maori quote about going into the future, looking back at the past, I believe it was, which is grandparents. Grandparents is an interesting time, isn't it? I remember my grandparents. They were around when I was a kid, and they would talk about what life was like when they were kids. And presumably, I don't have kids, but my nephews and nieces will remember me backwards, if you see what I mean, the other way. So there's a kind of 5-generation span there that is all held in my head, that is all somehow kind of, it's not about imagining thousands of years back. But the story that my grandparents told me about what the world was like then is sort of in me somehow. Right. And actually just thinking about that, and I guess my train of thought of this was thinking that the weather we're having right now apparently is 4 degrees hotter than you would expect weather like this to be at our grandparents' sort of age. So over that time, we can go, wow, that's a change that they would have considered this to be much more unusual, perhaps even than we consider it to be now. Is anything I've said there of any use? Help?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the practices that we use the most, which is a practice that we developed, is called human layers. And what we do in that practice is we get people firstly to walk back in time to using a grandparent or someone of their generation, and we go back to their 9th birthday and imagine that birthday and imagine the world of that birthday, and we get people to think of a particular quality that person had that evokes warmth in them, and then so we get them to track that back through time, so to kind of keep that human connection, and so to do exactly as you described, think of that world, and then we get them to come into the present and think of it younger person, a child that they care about, and do the same thing moving forward to that child's 90th birthday, which will likely be at the end of this century, the beginning of the next one, and again to imagine what the world might be like back then. And then we do a kind of legacy exercise whilst you're there in the future, and then we bring people back to the present. And we find it to be like, I think it's safe to say, like the most potent practice that we do. So whenever I do work, in pretty much any context, but particularly with policymakers, I always begin with that practice. And like I've done it on like stadium Zoom gigs for literally thousands of Canadian civil servants, in kind of small groups with high-level policymakers. And when I started doing this, I was like, they're going to think I'm a massive hippie. I'm going to have no credibility because like I'm starting, before we get into anything, I'm taking them through this meditation. And to my face, no one has ever said that. And what we find is that essentially what we're doing is we're priming people to be good ancestors before we even start. We're priming them to have an ancestral perspective for the work that we're about to do. And we're enabling them to bring their kind of emotional humanity to whatever the question at hand is. And we've just found like the quality of engagement of participants is so much worse if we don't do that. So I think what you were saying, Dave, it exactly echoes what you're saying, that it is a really useful perspective.
And it just strikes me as a thing that you could do in the pub with your mates. Maybe not, you'd have to ease into it from being a hippie point of view, but, just asking kind of people to think about tell me about your grandparents. What was it like for them? What was it like for them when they were kids? I guess the point I'm making is this doesn't have to be a kind of like a retreat exercise that you only do when you're feeling like you want to get in touch with something. If we want to help us and our friends to think a bit more like this, it's quite easy to do, actually, because that lens is fascinating to us as well, I reckon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to state that, like, when we talk about being good ancestors, this is not about being a parent. Like, all of us, whether we have children or not, are ancestors. We are all building the world that is to come. The people who are alive in the future will all look at us as the people who built whatever they're dealing with. So, this is for all of us.
So give me a few examples that you know of when arts and culture has done this brilliantly. You've been talking about that being important to your work. What has inspired you about visions of time through arts and culture?
There's lots of different ways that artists have engaged with time. The artist Katie Paterson, who I just saw this weekend in Edinburgh, actually. She's a Scottish artist, and she has co-created the Future Library in Norway, where every year they get a well-known writer to write a book that will not be read for 100 years. So these are very famous writers, and the book gets wrapped up and buried in the woods, and they will be excavated in 100 years' time. So the writer is writing for an audience that will exist beyond their lifetimes. And they've created like a whole future library around it. So, that is a beautiful project, and all of Katie's work, I really recommend checking out her work. Deals with these themes in really profound ways. I think fiction is really interesting in this space. I am an avid speculative future reader. So whether that is Octavia Butler, or my recommendation for the last year is a book called In Ascension by MacInnes, amazing book of speculative fiction. The space is just booming at the moment. So I think there's lots in that space as well. And then something very different, but some artists whose work I really love, are some VR artists called Marshmallow Laser Feast. And their work really helps us develop empathy with other species. So they have one project called Treehugger, where you essentially become a water droplet moving up through an ancient sequoia. So you're doing this in VR goggles with the body stuff on, and it is the most moving experience. I can't, when I say it, you're like, well, how can it be that moving being a water droplet? But literally, I remember the first time I did it, I took off the VR set and I was just in tears, and Urson, one of the co-creators, kind of gave me a big hug, and he was like, this is why we call it Treehugger, because everybody cries afterwards. They all need hugs. Wow. And they've got another piece called Through In the Eyes of the Animal, where you see the world. So this is more scientific than our pigeon chats, where based on a lot of scientific research, you experience the world as a different creature would experience it, but you get eaten by progressively larger creatures. So you might start as a fly, so you see the world as a fly, and then you get eaten by a frog, and you see the world as a frog, and then you get eaten by another predator. And so it's just, again, this incredible experience of empathizing with what it might be to be another species. So there's loads, but there are a few pointers.
Because I guess a lot of people might have thought when you said that, like science fiction, kind of like doomy versions of the future. But I'm not sure that's quite getting at it somehow, is it? When you've kind of got dystopian futures. I guess it sort of does the thing of going, well, yeah, that's a future we could live in. But somehow I think because we know it's not connected to us, but things that allow you to kind of get inside the head of things that are happening now and go forward in the future, feel like they might be a bit more meaningful.
Yeah, and I think the whole field of speculative futures is, it's just booming. I was just at the Edinburgh Book Festival this weekend. I discovered, probably loads of your listeners know this genre. I'd never heard of it, romantasy, romance and fantasy. I was like, that's an interesting genre. And I went to this incredible workshop, which was a close read of Octavia Butler, where we had a section from the Parable of the Sower. And there was a group of 20 of us around a table with a writer who knew the text really well. But then essentially, and it was very much like a community session, we were all putting ourselves in that world, writing a manifesto for the people, to galvanize people living in that world. And it was so interesting as a process, because I could see that the process of writing a manifesto for a dystopia, albeit one that's, pretty prescient and set next year, was doing things to the way that people were thinking about the present, And so I think there is something about, yes, we are certainly not only interested in dystopias, and there's a huge amount of really important propositional work that needs to happen. We are very, very used to imagining dystopias, and, as I think it was Ursula Le Guin who said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. It is very important that the work of, all the imagination infrastructure work that people like Joseph Rowntree Foundation are doing is very important. We have to get better at making better futures where we don't completely screw it up, feel like they are probable and possible. So all of that, and I think there is something interesting with how we can engage with these more dystopic or ambivalent versions of the future.
progress, this idea of progress, and something in what you were just saying that made me think about it. We've got this idea, right, of the future going in a direction somehow. There's a kind of thing that is the future, and it's not written yet, and we can sort of change it. But is there any sort of problem with how we conceive of the idea of progress and what it's for and what we're doing all this for anyway, that feels like it's really a question about time?
I love the way, Dave, you're like, just one more little question.
I know, just one more tiny thing.
Yes, there is a problem with how we view progress. I think your smartphone intervention earlier is a really good illustration of that. Because on the one hand, people making smartphones will feel like it will be progress for them to keep building the best smartphone ever, and for more people to have access to the best smartphone ever for more time, and to be constantly developing that technology. And yet we know that smartphone use, as we were just talking about, is incredibly toxic for young people. It is having huge mental health implications. And so actually the kind of progress of the technology of the smartphone isn't resulting in better outcomes. It's resulting in better phones, but that's not resulting in better well-being and better outcomes for our lives. And I think that's just an example of one of the many spaces that is playing out in. The incentives of our system do not incentivize our well-being. They incentivize extraction and accumulation. And so given that, what we understand growth and progress to be are not necessarily going to be good for our lives. In fact, most of the time they won't be good for the majority, but for a very, very tiny minority. And so, yes, it is incredibly important to be very critical about these ideas of progress and growth.
Because when people imagine the future, they will often, and even if you say to them, what do you imagine the world will be like? What do you want it to be like? I did this exercise with you the other day, so it's kind of fresh in my head, that they will often go, I went kind of technology-y. So there will be spaceships and there will be, technology stuff. But how often do you find when you have those conversations with people that they go to what it's like to be alive, to kind of like what actually being a human is like? So not imagining the future simply as a thing that's got better flying cars in it, but a thing where people might be happy. Is that easy for people to do?
I think there's a real mixture. I mean, we see some people kind of go straight to a much more human experience and others be in that traditional future space of, a kind of hyper-techno-utopian or dystopian vision of the future. So I think, people can go both ways. I think I had this amazing conversation with the writer Jay Griffith about where we locate the future. And she said to me, when I say the future, where does your mind first go? And my mind went straight to space, and it went to like Star Wars and like another galaxy far, far away. And then she helped me realize, she talks about this kind of tendency to verticality that we have, that we see things that are up as superior in many different ways. And I realized that this kind of me seeing the future is out there in space, far, far away. Like, no wonder I couldn't empathize with it. Like, it's a place I've never been, I'm never going to go. And instead, she was like, how is it to imagine that you are standing on the future? Like, take off your shoes, go outside, stand on some soil. You are standing on the future. Here is where the future is. And that really transforms how the future feels.
So do you have one thing that we can all do? People have put down this podcast and they want to embrace the future. What's a quick thing we can do?
I mean, obviously go and talk to some pigeons. Once you've had a chat with the pigeons. I mean, one thing you could do is one thing you can do is just have a drink of water. Like, have a drink of water. And when you're drinking the water, remember that the water you're drinking is the same water that rained on the dinosaurs, the same water that the Vikings sailed their ships through, that, it is this water that has been here since the beginning of our planet. And I find that really helps connect me to deep time. Pat McCabe, a Lakota elder who I work with sometimes, has this really lovely water practice where she says if you've got something that is bothering you, a question that you need an answer to, place a glass of water by your bedside overnight. Ask the question at night. In the morning, drink the water. And that water will have likely passed through most species in this world. And so you will have the wisdom of the world to give you an answer, which I thought was very poetic.
That reminds me of that old Terry Pratchett joke about how the water in London is the purest water there is because it's been through so many kidneys. Ella, thank you so much for coming on Your Brain on Climate. How can people find out more about all of this amazing stuff?
You can listen to our podcast, The Long Time Academy, wherever you get your podcasts, or just search The Long Time Project and check out our work.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Ella. Thank you for listening, as always. Thank you for the wonderful reviews that you leave, the brilliant emails that you send to hello@yourbrainonclimate.com. It's great to know people are listening. Please spread the word. Let's get more people listening. That really, really helps a small indie podcast like me compete with the big boys. A reminder, I'd love your dosh at patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. But I know times are tough, and if you can't do that, a review would be fantastic. I shall see you next time. And remember, next time you see a pigeon, have a little word with it. All right, bye.